So, I recently did a series of drawings over on my TikTok, which is at TheBentonReed, just like everywhere else, based on different weird phobias that I found on the internet. And I wanted to kind of put together some of the drawings and narrate them and kind of talk about my process a little bit and do something a little more in depth than I could get on TikTok. So I hope you enjoy. Starting off with our first drawing that I did. These are not in chronological order, they're in the order of the ones that I like. I do like this one. I don't necessarily like it the least, but it was the first one and it's a pretty different style from the rest of them. So this one was based on domatophobia. No idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it is the fear of houses or homes or domestic spaces. So this one went through a lot of iterations. You may have just seen that figure crouching on the ceiling/floor pop up and then disappear immediately because I didn't like it. But yeah, I'm flatting in some colors right now underneath a basic red line and then just going to add in these jaws and teeth. Like I said, I did a different style for this one. So whereas a lot of the other ones I did more of a traditional 1 or 2 layer paint, this one is a lot of different layers, flat colors, and then using multiply layers or just blending modes in general to shade, to add shadow and highlight. I had this idea of doing a TV in the room behind the jaws. So I looked up a color test pattern, put it in there, and really tried my best to block it out with the colors. But that will also end up disappearing, so don't get too attached to it. Here I'm just starting to slowly add in some of the shadows. So I'm doing a foreground shadow with this light pinkish purple color that's going to go a little more blue, darkening some of those door jamb shadows, just slowly layering in different shadows on different multiply layers, using a variety of blues and purples. I took out the multiply layers on the TV so that it kind of would look like it was glowing. And then here I'm just using a really, really rough eraser to kind of carve out those multiply layers to give that sense of something glowing. Here I'm committing to just full darkness behind these teeth, behind this TV. That will also end up not being what I end up with, but just taking that really, really rough eraser. I really like the texture that I was able to get with this. It was very free form, it was very intuitive, and then just taking out the highlights on those gums and adding in some deeper shadows, and you'll see me come through and add some brighter highlights, just taking out as much as I can. I'm really happy with the way that the rendering on the gums came out. I ended up doing a lot of gums during this series, which kind of makes sense. Teeth and gums are kind of creepy, but these are definitely some of my favorite gums that I did. They've just got a really nice texture to them, and again, just you can see me taking out those really bright highlights to add a little bit more. And then around here is where the TV disappears because I stopped liking it. So I'm just completely taking it away, going to a new layer, and just doing a kind of gaping throat using a few different layers. I start in red, and then I decide I don't like that. I like the monochrome look that I've got, so I shift it to a bluish purple. And that is my piece on domatophobia, the fear of domestic spaces. Coming next, we have xanthophobia, which is the fear of the color yellow. This one was really fun. I was inspired by the old short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, which if you haven't read it, it's about a woman who's been diagnosed with hysteria, as all women before like 2005 were. And she's locked in a room, and it has creepy yellow wallpaper that she thinks someone is inside. So I wanted to kind of create this effect of a face emerging from a wall. It was definitely an interesting exercise to try and get the planes of a face emerging from a surface. So I had a reference image that I had pulled up, and I was kind of taking from it where the shadows and things would lie, and specifically focusing on how it interacted with the stretching of the material. So again, more teeth, more gums, not as detailed as the last one, but still really interested with how they turned out. And I just tried to keep this one really, really gestural and not get super, super ingrained in the details. I definitely was going through a lot with this one of trying to get it to blend into the background, and it wasn't until the very end where I really got it to a point where I felt like I liked it. I also wasn't super happy with the colors, so I will change those a little bit later in the process. But once I had those planes of the face kind of leveled in, I started going through and just taking that shading out so that it really starts to look more like it's part of a whole unit. So I'm just bringing that shadow down, blending out a little bit, and this was all done one layer using just different monochrome colors. And you can see me blast through a bunch of different color options and mess with the curves to try and really get a big solid yellow. I tried a gradient map, didn't like it, tried some different things, and ended up with more of a goldenrod kind of yellowy orange for the fear of the color yellow. Up next, breaking the chronology. This is actually the last one I ended up doing, but there are a few things I'm not super happy with, so I'm saving some of the ones I really enjoy for later. This is Phobias, Scopophobia. Your guess is as good as mine on how I'm supposed to pronounce it, but it's the fear that somebody's watching you or that you are being stared at. So I really just wanted to get this exaggerated underlit face. This one was definitely a fun little thing because it was, again, kind of like the last one that I showed, just exercising with the layers of the face and the planes of the face and playing with an interesting light and a very high contrast light. And so I just blocked in those planes, and now I'm blocking in some really big exaggerated eyes and more teeth and gums because I love teeth and gums apparently. And I really wasn't too focused on realism or anatomy. I wanted to read like a human face, but I also wanted it to be really creepy and to really over exaggerate these eyes. So just layering in some shadows, giving them these bright red irises, and just enough detail to read while still preserving that really blank whiteness of the eye. And just adding more and more shadows. I'm going to come through in a bit and begin to kind of blend through all of these different shapes, kind of blend these colors together. They're very much kind of split between a green and a yellow color. Here you can see me adding in the teeth and gums, just making them big and chunky and creepy. I'm also really happy with how the teeth specifically came out on this one. I took a lot of what I learned from some of the earlier drawings and just slapped it onto these teeth, and they came out very creepy. Certainly not, anatomically accurate. They are kind of very just flat spread across his face, but I thought that looked a little bit creepier than having them recede into the back of the jaw like they actually would. I don't know if you saw that flash before of me taking out the top layer and creating something truly horrifying. I honestly, every time I took out the top layer, I was like, do I even need the top layer? I could just, put this on a black background and be done. But just slowly adding more detail, more shadows to these eyeballs and to the teeth. This one I actually did start using multiple layers to add some of the shadows, not only to separate the face from the eyes, but also to start adding shadows. So a couple of them are on multiply layers and not just strictly using different tones or colors. Here you can see me start to blend out these colors, and as I've started doing digital painting, coming from traditional painting, getting Photoshop to blend the way that I really want it to blend has been the hardest part of it. So I kind of started to get it with this last piece that I did, but it definitely is still something that I'm trying to figure out how all of the different settings and all of the different brushes interact with each other. And just slowly adding in some more things, some more deeper shadows, blending out his forehead kind of. And then I decided I don't really like the green hue, so I shift it to a better skin tone, and then I add just another layer on top to just kind of deep fry and crunch it, take out those white eyes so that we really get that brightness of the light. And, maybe this is what you're going to see in the dark of the night. Not finally. Up next, we have Sclesophobia or Sclechophobia. Again, should have looked up how to pronounce most of these before I started recording this, but I'm not gonna. This is the fear of worms, or the fear of being infested by worms. So I had this visual idea of a kind of creepy, ugly mouth just disgorging a giant worm. So I found a reference photo for the jaw, kind of exaggerated some of the wrinkles and folds in it, got these really gross yellowy teeth and like grayish gums. Again, just so much attention paid to the teeth and gums in every piece that had them for some reason. And then I just start blocking in the worms. I'm starting with this light pink color, cleaning it up a little bit, adding that kind of ribbon band that they have on an earthworm, some of the shadows, and just kind of overgoing, cleaning up the sides. And then I start laying in all of the tones and shading. So I'm using kind of a bluish gray to get some of the early shadows as kind of my darkest tone. I don't want it to be too dark, but I'm just kind of slowly going along that outer edge, blending out as much as I can. You can see me add in a little bit of a kind of magenta color to bring back some of the color, adding in a really stark white highlight to give it that slimy feel with a little bit of a yellowish green just to complement that magenta. Doing the same thing on the bottom. I definitely had a little bit of trouble. For some reason, the ribbon was not blending the same way as the top part. And so trying to find the right colors to adjust to look like the same thing, but to adjust for the colors underneath for the local color was a challenge. And I'm definitely a lot happier with the rendering on the darker parts of the worm than I am on this little central ribbon. But then just going in, adding the final touches, kind of bringing some red into the background, though I think most of that ends up going away. And then I'm going to add a little bit more contact shadow from the jaw onto the worm itself, just so it really looks like it's emerging from this jaw. And you can see, throwing up worms. Sorry to anybody who doesn't like worms. And now, actually, finally, my favorite one from the series, and I think the one that I definitely spent the most time on, this is isoptrophobia, which is the fear of mirrors. So I knew I wanted to do like a broken mirror kind of thing, and honestly that's what took me the most time. Found a reference image, kind of got this spider webbing crack, and then did that in a red line, took a light blue and just started filling in all of those little cracks, avoiding where the red lines were so that I'd be left with a black negative space when I took away the red lining. And yeah, I mean, this took me probably 30-40 minutes just by itself. I wasn't using the paint bucket because I was trying to use the wet media brush. And so it's just, outline it, fill it in, outline it, fill it in, over and over and over again. And you're very lucky that you can't see all of my panning in this view, because boy howdy was I zooming in and moving around and zooming out and just slowly but surely filling in all of these little things. I'm very happy with how this one turned out, but it was definitely a lot of very repetitive processes and just doing the same thing over and over again to a bunch of different individual pieces of the material. So almost done filling in all of these little gaps. You can see now where that black negative space is, going in on, I think, a new layer maybe, and adding in some bright white highlights to kind of get the sense of an effect. And I really liked this kind of crater of negative space that was created by the origin of the cracks. So I decided to add some blood stains, some kind of blood that had dried onto the mirror itself, right up against that point of origin. And I still had this really interesting negative space. So in just a minute, I can see it start coming in there. I decided, why not add an eyeball? So I added this little eyeball. It's going to have a green iris because I really wanted it to stick out against this red. So it kind of blends in with the blues and purples that I'm going to end up using on the outer side a little bit. But since it's that green right up against that red, it really pops, even though it's so small in the composition. So now going in, adding some environmental shading, just taking a slightly darker blue and kind of origining away from the eyeball to kind of give this sense that there's a light source somewhere and there's a little bit of shadow in the way that the mirror is reflecting it. And just using a couple of different tones to blend that out very slowly, but not really concerning myself with getting it too clean of a blend. I want it to be very texturous, to be very kind of goopy. I thought about adding some red to the white light, didn't end up liking it. And then it was still really, really flat, and I wasn't super happy with the colors, so I do a similar thing to what I did on the staring one, and I add an overlay, carve out my highlights, make them show up a little better, and then I will eventually, once I find the color that I'm liking, I will carve away with a really rough eraser some of the light around that eyeball. And that's the fear of mirrors. So that's 5 drawings, 5 phobias. This was really fun. It got me back into digital painting after being away for quite a few months of not really doing a lot of paintings to going to doing a lot of digital work every single day. So I hope you enjoyed. Like and follow for more. I am TheBentonReed, and I'll catch you in the next one.